My friend and I would go for night drives all of the time. Sometimes Jamie and I would find a spot where we could see the stars really well and just lie back on the hood of his car. Driving around at night, we've had some incredible conversations, and occasionally we see some really cool things. Driving is Jamie's thing. He loves it. Last night, Jamie was in an awful mood. He called me saying he needed to go for a ride and didn't want to be alone. But when he picked me up, he could barely talk to me. He was speeding, but he's a good driver, so I wasn't concerned. We got pretty deep into the countryside, and I didn't recognize the area at all. We've been driving for a long time though. At this point, it was just dirt roads and no streetlights. I suggested we go back, but Jamie says he couldn't go home right now, so we kept going. A while later, we were driving through the wooded area, and Jamie pulled over to announce he had to go to the bathroom. "Don't go too far," I told him. Jamie and I had explored enough forests at night, and I wasn't even slightly worried, and I thought he'd be back right away. I was looking down at my phone, scrolling through Reddit for what felt like a really long time. I looked up to see if I could see Jamie heading back, and I thought I saw a person standing straight ahead, about 20 feet in front of me. I flashed the car lights just to make sure, and sure enough, a man was standing there staring at me. Once I flashed the lights, he started groaning very loudly and just kept staring. I immediately locked the car doors. We were in the middle of nowhere. I hadn't seen another person or passing cars in ages. I called Jamie, but I could hear his phone ringing. He had left it in the car. My stomach dropped. There was no way it could take this long for him to go to the bathroom. He should have been back by now. I started looking out the passenger window, looking for him. Making a silent deal with myself, if he wasn't back in 3 minutes, I was going to call the police and drive away to somewhere safe. When I looked back, straight ahead, I saw the man was only 10 feet away now, and instead of groaning, he was weeping, still staring very intensely at me. I decided to screw waiting 3 minutes and just take off, when Jamie reappeared. The man stopped weeping. I unlocked the door for Jamie and let him into the car. Jamie looked super pale and very stone-faced. I started freaking out and screaming at him that we had to go, but he just sat there. Suddenly, a bunch of people, covered in body paint, emerged from the trees. I started crying and pleading with Jamie to start driving, but it was as if he couldn't hear me. The people set the man on fire. The man didn't make a noise, and the people started chanting. Jamie started howling with laughter. He then proceeded to turn the car around, and we drove away. He was speeding faster than he had ever done before. I started to dial the police, but Jamie grabbed my phone. "Don't call the police, or you'll be next." He then gave the phone back to me. After that, Jamie returned to being emotionless and refused to talk to me, but he was muttering a ton under his breath. I couldn't understand any of it though. It didn't even sound English. I was too petrified to say or do anything, and Jamie dropped me off. Since then, Jamie texted me every hour on the hour saying, "Do you want the fire to spread?" I haven't responded to any of his texts yet. Something happened to Jamie in the woods, I'm sure of it. He sent me a new text a few minutes ago saying, "Let's go for a drive. I want to show you something." I don't know what to do. To start off, I'm not a believer in anything paranormal, magical, or voodoo, none of that. The extent of my creepy ghost-like or urban legend experiences, until now, had been through my friends, and most of them chalked it up to the usual. It was a cougar fox scream, not a woman's. The wind did that. It was just a messed up homeless guy stalking me, and then left it at that. But I cannot logically explain to myself what I just witnessed in any terms other than saying it was unnatural at best, or terrifyingly unworldly at worst. So this all happened just a few hours ago, when I decided to do something different after work, and take a hike by this little park my shop is by. I'm a mechanic. It's something my wife loves to do, and I decided to take some trails she likes to go on. Now, the thing about this park is it's basically just an oval, some roads to look at the scenery, and a place to fish and dock boats in the lake nearby. But after that, it's mostly trails. The trails go out into the woods about 10 miles, and after that, it's about 1,000 acres of no man's land woods, and blind cliffs owned by the state. People get lost, go missing, all of the time because idiots think they can rough it, and my wife had her own stories of going off the trail for a second and getting instantly turned around. In my college days, I used to do the same thing, but not anymore since I've had my fair share of getting scared after getting lost in places like that. It's by the grace of God I could always find my way back, but it's never a wise thing to do, even if you are confident in your navigation skills. I think you're getting the picture of the place that I was in. When I get there, I'm parked and I decided to take one of the relatively shorter routes, a 2-mile trail. Since it had been a while since I hiked the trails and I didn't have any gear on me, plus it would be dark soon, I grabbed a map from my office right by the start of all the trails, on the off chance I got lost or something, and thank God I did. I was pretty confident that getting lost wouldn't be that big of a deal, since one of the longer trails, also a round trail, about 10 miles made for camping on, went all the way around the parking lot, and my trail and my car being in the center of the whole thing. When in doubt, I could walk in any one direction and find it and get back home. So, starting off the hike, I wasn't worried, just ready to get some walking in, and then brag to my wife how I finally went out to see her favorite place. I'd say I was even excited. The weather was amazing, the wind was just the right speed, and I would have something to talk about. I'd say I got about a quarter mile in before things got a little weird. It wasn't that there was anything visibly off or anything, just that I started to feel uncomfortable, kind of like a nagging feeling in the back of my mind saying, "You should probably leave." I had already started and didn't really feel like turning around, so I kept going, looking at wildlife, enjoying the view when I could, and generally taking it slow. But that feeling never did go away. It was at the halfway point, at what my map said was the crest of the trail. That feeling got overwhelming. It was suffocating, like my whole body wanted to just up and run out of that perfectly fine looking trail. But I had already come so far, and there was no use in turning around since I was at the halfway point. I thought maybe I was just getting freaked out since I hadn't done it in a while, or maybe I was just having a panic attack from all the stress I'd been under for the last few days. So I decided to sit down and take a breather to calm myself down. It didn't. Around 5 minutes into me flipping through my phone and reading some random Reddit stories, I noticed how quiet the woods had gotten. The air was completely silent. There was literally nothing. You ever hear the phrase, silence can be deafening? Well, in that moment, it was so quiet I could hear my ears ring. It hurt it was so silent, and it unnerved me to no end. So I did what any husband does. I called my wife for guidance. The conversation went something like this, at full speaker volume since I was so desperate to clear the air. "David, what's going on?" She knew something was up because I rarely ever called, even for emergencies. "Hey, don't worry, I'm gonna be a bit late, since I decided I was gonna hike that 2-mile loop today. But I had a question for you. What does it mean when the woods get, suddenly quiet?" She went silent for a bit, freaking me out more. "Where are you on the trail? How far in?" "About a mile. Why?" "I want you to get up and grab a big rock or a sharp, long stick or something, and finish the trail as quickly as possible, but don't run. It's quiet because there's a predator around, maybe a bear or a cougar, something big at least. I don't want to freak you out, but I want you to know that it probably already knows you're there. And if it's a cougar, it's probably been following you. Make it know you're there, and don't run. I'll drive up to the trail and meet you when you get out." She hung up before I could properly freak out. Rather than puking up my anxiety or running as fast as I could, I got a stick, broke some of it off so it'd be sharp, and sent a quick "I love you, thanks" text to my wife. Our house is close, so I knew she'd be there in about 15 minutes or so, but it didn't calm me down. Not at all. For the next half hour, I'd slowed down to about a crawl as I looked around for whatever could be near me. All the while, the woods were still quiet. At this point, I was so anxious, I wanted to barf. And I might have, if I wasn't so paranoid that closing my eyes just for a second would alert whatever was making the woods so quiet attack. So I just went on, looking over my shoulder every few seconds and stopping to strain my ears to hear if there was anything walking around me. For a long stretch of time, there wasn't. Still no sound. Still no wildlife. Still nothing. Just my heart racing. But as I went onto the trail into some thicker parts of the woods, I began to notice how my footsteps seemed to echo ever so slightly. It was hardly noticeable, and had I not been so on alert, I wouldn't have even registered it, but once I heard it, it was deafening. When I stopped to check behind me though, there was nothing. At first, I thought I had just gotten so worked up that I was hearing things, that the quiet was messing with my head and my brain got bored, so I tried to ignore it. But after a while, I just couldn't. It was so unnerving that I started to play with it. I'd quicken my pace ever so slightly, stop, go nearly into a full sprint, and every time, an almost perfectly in-time replica would follow. I hated every second of it. It felt so unreal that I could feel my body begging me to just book it, but I couldn't. If it really was a cougar, it'd get me. So I tried one last effort to see if it was really in my head or not. I took a few normal steps and then acted like I was about to put my foot down before I stopped, just above the leaves. Crunch. I had never gone so still in my life. I couldn't breathe as the sound of an extra footsteps echoed in my brain, and somehow I knew, just knew deep down despite never being involved in this type of stuff, that whatever was behind me was unnatural. For the longest time I couldn't move, and sure as hell didn't want to look behind me. I'm 5'3" and wouldn't last a second. After what must have only been a few seconds, now that I think about it, I started walking again, faster this time. The echo admittedly didn't return, but I still had a suffocating sense of dread and terror pumping through my veins. I only had a quarter mile left to go, and I was sure ready to get out of that place. I wasn't any less scared than I was, but at least I had the solace of still being in one piece and getting one step closer to my wife. I thought it was all over at this point, and that it was just going to be a moment of me having a freak-out moment and laugh about it tomorrow. And, after being a few minutes of footstep free, and hearing my wife call my name a little ways up the trail, the relief washed over me had me thinking just that. I had been walking slower than usual, so I wasn't even shocked that she had to come meet me on the trail. From the exit, it would only be about a 15-minute walk from her quick pace. She was the type of person to meet you if you were freaked out, even in the middle of nowhere. What else was I supposed to suspect? So, I keep walking and hear her call me again. I reply with some, "I'm coming, I'm here, I'm safe." Keep on following the trail. There was nothing that threw me off. Not a single thing, so I just kept going. The only thing that I had even detected was off was that no matter how much further I got, her voice didn't get any louder. It was odd, but I thought maybe she was trying to lead me to the exit, or thought I went off the trail or something. And when I heard her voice subtly switch from in front of me to my left, those suspicions were answered. At least they were for a split second. I was bleary from all that fear. I knew that. And when I remembered who was calling for me, I knew for a fact that that woman had learned her lesson on getting lost in the woods. The last time had nearly been over a year ago, and she was lost for a whole night. She didn't go hiking for a few months after that and was so shaken up, and had to go to therapy for weeks because of it. She loved me, but she wouldn't go into the woods for me, not again. But what else could it be? So, for a second, I just listened, as her voice subtly got closer, still calling my name. The more I listened, the odder I noticed it was. It was the same. Every single time she said it, it sounded exactly the same. Same intonation. Same speed, everything. No other words but my name. None. And it kept getting closer. "Hun, is that you? Answer me, yes or no." I don't know why I asked that. I honestly don't, but I'm sure as hell glad I did. For about a second, it had stopped. Back to the silence, and I thought my heart was going to implode from the anticipation. It nearly did when I heard the most curdling scream I'd ever heard from a woman. It just kept going and going. There was only a stop, like for a gasp of air, but the sound never weakened or broke like anyone in pain would. It was just an ongoing sound that would pause for a second and then just keep going. And in my panic, I booked it as fast as I possibly could, because all of the things I knew and I didn't, that thing wasn't my wife. Running at the speed, I was in a hurry. I didn't even notice I went off the trail, since they weren't well cleared this time of year, and I didn't know I was lost until I knew I shouldn't have been out in the woods. But I couldn't stop. I didn't want to turn around and run back because that thing was still screeching, and it still wasn't getting any closer to me. I could hardly see from the tears in my eyes as I just kept running, bolting until my legs were nearly about to collapse and until my lungs felt like they were being pierced. I hadn't even gone a full 5 minutes before I had to stop, with that screeching still behind me. There was nothing I could do. I was in the middle of a gigantic forest. I had dropped my stick, and something that wasn't a cougar, a bear, or a fox was following me. That 10-mile loop was at least a mile or two away from where I ran, and if that was my only bet, it would be dark by the time I found it. It didn't even matter since I was so out of breath. All I could do was hide, since the trails themselves were getting pretty messy when they weren't all forest. I raced to find myself some rocks and ended up squeezing myself between them. Thinking back now, this was the stupidest thing I could have chosen to do, but in that moment, it was the best I had. I sat between those rocks, holding my breath, sweating up an anxious, smelly storm, as my bug eyes looked around to see what I could see from my hiding spot. The screaming never did stop, but the footsteps returned. It was a very quiet, very subtle crunch, so predatory in nature. But I think the worst part of it all, the part that may never leave my mind, is that this thing's footsteps moved right behind me to the back end of the rock and totally covered me. That screaming never got any louder, even when it was right behind me. The scream stayed the exact same volume, until, out of nowhere, it just stopped on a dime. I heard the footsteps explore around for a long, long time, but eventually they too went far away and I couldn't hear them. I didn't dare leave my hiding spot for what I determined was about an hour, trembling and the light-headed as it got darker. When I finally pried myself out of the rock cheeks that saved me, for that moment, I walked as quickly as I could towards the 10-mile loop, hoping to find it and some campers before dark. I made it to the trail just after dark, exploring for 2 hours, and found a ranger cabin just a little ways from where I started on. She had just been getting the missing persons call from my wife when I knocked on her door, pale as a ghost, scared. Before she took me back, which was thankfully a short drive on her four-wheeler, I asked if I could use her toilet and threw up more violently than I had ever have in my whole life. She didn't ask me what happened, just took me back, and on the whole way from the cabin to the parking lot, holding on to her a lot more tightly than someone with dignity should. I had a distinct feeling of being watched. My wife nearly sobbed when she saw me. 5 hours later to the parking lot that I was meant to be, the cops and the ranger checked over me and determined that though shaken up, I was fine. My wife and I left, and she pulled over into a nearby gas station to calm herself down. As she looked me over, utterly silent, "I thought you had gotten attacked by a cougar or something, David." All I could say was, "It wasn't a cougar." The silence that she gave me then, the look on her face as she just stared at me, will never leave my mind. Before she said freakier stuff that I could manage to describe what I had just been through. I know. I just got home about an hour ago, and I haven't spoken to my wife about it any further. We've just been quiet. I still have sticks in my hair, but I'm terrified to be alone. What did I just witness? This story takes place around a few years ago, when my dad left town for a business trip. I've never told anyone this story, but I guess I now have. I used to live in a fairly wooded area, with about a 2-story house in a small town in the United States. This house was kind of creepy though. I don't know how to exactly describe it, but it's always just settling, after being there for maybe decades. If you really shut up and have no source of sound, you can hear a noise, like a muffled crack, with a drag that lingers a small amount too long for comfort. But the story's not about that house. It's about something even scarier. About 5 meters behind the house, it's nothing but forest for approximately 3 miles. I'm one of those people who is just absolutely fascinated by the wilderness, but never likes going out. Knowing that my dad was out for a business trip, and he thought I was adult enough to stay out of trouble whilst he was gone, I tried changing my ways and decided to go into those woods. Little did I know, that would be the biggest mistake of my life. It was approaching the late evening when I embarked on my journey. I had a little caution in my step since I was deathly scared of mountain lions, snakes, coyotes, and the like. But as I went along some trails, I felt better and got more of a pep in my step. I even got confident enough to hike a bit away from the trail. Thing is, I kind of ended up getting lost. I started to panic. I tried to find my way back to the trails. Being a coward and the sensitive teen child I was, shaking in my sneakers was my first instinct. Mind you, I was only 15 at the time. I started to walk around, growing increasingly anxious. The walking turned to running, the running turned to sprinting, and eventually the sprinting turned to sitting and crying. I was huddled up against a rock, knees to my chest, sobbing silently. This was it. These are going to be my last moments out here. I don't have the guts to get an animal, and I wouldn't know how to light a fire. If it wasn't starvation, I'd definitely be taken by a vicious predator with malicious intent. It wouldn't be by natural causes, or in the military, or saving someone. No, I'd be gone because of my stupid decision to go off of the path. I started to think about what it would be like. Would I be reincarnated? Would I be in an empty void for nothing for all eternity? Would I be with God in heaven until the end of time? And even if I went to heaven, would it be for the better? I was raised in a Christian household, and raised to know heaven as a paradise. But there was something scratching at the back of my head. Maybe heaven wasn't a great place as it was